G'day guys, Chronicles of Solid here and welcome back to the garage. Today I wanted to talk to you about navigation. Specifically, should you choose a GPS or should you take a smartphone and use the GPS app? Both are really great options and I'll discuss the pros and cons of each in this video, so let's roll the intro. Alrighty, I'm going to try and keep this short and sweet. It's going to be a comparison between GPSs and smartphones. I'm not going to do a deep dive on each device I use. So my current setup is I use a GPS, specifically the Garmin GPSMAPS78S, and when I'm on a big adventure ride I also take my iPad with Motion X on it as well. So both of them are fantastic options, and I'll go through the GPS first. So I was faced with this decision back in 2013 when I started my off-road career, and I chose a little handheld 78S. Basically I wanted a GPS because it had analog buttons, so that meant it was far easier for me to use with my gloves on, and still is. It's also a lot more robust than a smartphone. It's taken heaps of knocks. The only wear it's showing so far is a scratch on the screen, and the battery cover is not as waterproof as it used to be. But that's a specific problem to the exact model of GPS I have. Generally speaking, the Garmin's are bomb-proof. Another really big pro of the GPS was it has a better desktop experience. Being able to plug in your GPS to the desktop and being able to edit, link up, create tracks is a fantastic option, and being able to update it with ease. The desktop experience I found is much better with the GPS. It's not all sunshine and lollipops with the GPS though. It does have some very big shortcomings. The first is that it's slow as a wet week compared to a smartphone. Garmin CPUs just cannot compete with the latest smartphone technology. It's a lot slower than even an S4 or an S5 or an iPhone 4 or an iPhone whatever. Another problem is they're expensive when compared to having a smartphone. Usually you've got a spare smartphone lying around that you no longer use because you've got the latest model. So in that way, having to fork out another $300 or $400 for a GPS does make the more expensive option, especially when you have to add on the cost of third-party maps to really get the benefit of a GPS. The last con is screen size. Now, you can get bigger GPSs with smartphone size screens, but you're talking big money by the time you get to something like a Garmin Montana, where I'm using a little Garmin 78S and it only has a 4-inch screen, which can get frustrating. And that is the reason why on big adventures I take my iPad with Motion X loaded up on it, because if I need to make changes to maps or figure my way out or take a different route, it's far easier to use the big screen on the iPad than it is on the piddly little GPS screen. So that's a major con. Your next option is to use your smartphone for navigation, and the pros of a smartphone are they're cheap. Usually you've got an old one lying around or you can find one secondhand. You'll also get price ratio to screen size. Often you'll get a bigger screen on a smartphone for a much cheaper price than what you would have to pay for a big screen on a GPS. Also, third-party apps are often inexpensive. Not always, but you can get some pretty decent apps like Motion X for a relatively cheap price. Faster processing speeds. The mobile phones are much quicker than a GPS. And depending on your app, it's not always restricted to one country. So those are the pros of a smartphone. But it's not all great as well with a smartphone. There are a few drawbacks. First is they're fairly easy to break in my experience. I don't know about you, but I'm a big muppet and I'm always dropping my smartphones, so I smash the screens a lot. So that's quite annoying. And not every smartphone is waterproof, so you might have to work around and get a case for it, and that makes it a little harder to put in the RAM mount sometimes, so that's something to think about. Another problem that might be specific to warmer countries is I've noticed on the rides that the smartphones overheat. My GPS has never overheated, even in our Australian 40+ degree days in the sun, it still cracks along, whereas the smartphones do tend to die in the arse if you leave them in the heat, direct sunlight for too long. Another con is that touchscreens are getting better with glove functionality, but it can be a little tricky even with the best smartphones, so often you have to take your gloves off and dick around, so that can get a little wearing. And the final thing is the desktop experience. A lot of these apps for the phone, they don't have a great or any desktop functionality, so you can't bring the maps up on your desktop and really get into detail and mess around with maps. You usually have to do all that on the phone or the iPad or the tablet you have. Now, if you didn't want a GPS but you don't want a smartphone and you want to combine all the functionality of all your electronic devices, you don't want to have a spot tracker, a phone and a GPS. There is a device where you can just merge all three. It's called the Inreach. It was originally made by Delorme, I believe was the company, but they've since been bought out by Garmin, so Garmin now make the Inreach, and basically it combines a emergency beacon, a smartphone and a GPS all in one device, which is pretty fantastic. But there is one piece of functionality that really annoys me that it doesn't have, and they don't have expandable memory. So that means I can't take my micro SD card with my topographical maps and load it up onto the device and have as much detail as I have on my Garmin GPS. Now I suspect in further generations they will have this, but at the moment they don't. So I am biding my time until that happens. So that's it for this video. Hopefully that's helped clarify the navigation devices that you've got to choose from and which one is best suited for you. Until next time, don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and leave your comments down in the comment section below, especially if you got experience with a particular navigation device that you really love or hate. And I've been Chronicles of Solid, and I'll catch you in the next video. See you later, guys.